Okay, I think it's time. Let's start with this little workshop of our tool Convpaint. I'm super glad that so many of you joined and are interested in learning something about our tool. I'll start with just quickly giving you an overview what I've planned. So I'll start with a very quick demonstration, so you'll just know in a brief, like in a nutshell, what this is all about, just so you can refer to everything afterwards. And then I'd like just to give you a short introduction to just the most basic background information, so you can understand the tool a little bit better, and maybe then also see its advantages more clearly, and yeah, also understand the tasks that we're going to solve together. So my goal is not only to tell you things, but in case you've been able to install the tool in advance, maybe you can also go along with some basic segmentation tasks that I'm going to show you here. And then in the second part, I'm just going to show you explain you some, like just very briefly explain some advanced features and show you how to solve them in Convpaint. So this is the goal, this is the plan, and yeah, I hope that I can show you a little bit how Convpaint might be useful to you. I've tried to start with really like on the basic level, because I was not obviously I couldn't know exactly what the knowledge level would be of the audience, but I hope that like along the presentation or along the workshop, we're going to get far enough so I can really show you maybe also some applicability for you of Convpaint in your work. While it's probably mostly going to be me talking, I still would like to encourage you to, if there's some very important questions, please go ahead and ask them in the chat. I hope that I will see them in time, but I'll try to check from time to time so that everybody gets along with what I'm saying. So as I said, a quick demonstration first. So what you see here is the image viewer Napari. I hope ideally everybody of you know more or less what Napari does. So basically what you can do is you can open images, you can open multiple layers, and you can display them, and then you can also handle them and analyze them. So what you already can see here on the right, this is basically the plugin of Convpaint. So this is basically what I'm going to show you in the next more or less 2 hours. And just a quick demonstration. So I'm going to open just one of the example images. This is a cell image in RGB. And what we can do with Convpaint is you can give some annotations. So now I'm going to say just this is background, and this is the cell. And then you can train, and here it says automatically segmented. You can also turn this off and do it step by step. And as you can see, pretty quickly, you get a segmentation. So we get the information. So we get a new layer here with the segmentation where every pixel or every position where there's a cell is blue. And also in the bottom right, like here, if you hover over the pixel, you can see class 2, class foreground, and in the background where it's red, you get the pixel like the class 1. And now what I think is really cool about Convpaint, there's other tools that have the same principle as, like, for example, Elastic, many of you might know, is that now you can adjust your segmentation. So for example, you can say like, no, I don't want the whole cell to be blue, or like class number 2. I only want the green part, and I want the separate part here. And we'll get to annotation quality a bit later. So now I'm just doing very basic annotations, but still we'll see it works pretty well. So now you get a segmentation of 3 classes, nuclei and cell body and background. So this, as I said, just a very brief presentation. I didn't want to go too much into details because this we're going to do later together. Just quickly check if there's any questions so far. Doesn't seem like it. Perfect. So what we're doing with Convpaint is called, as I said, maybe this is going to be a bit repetition for some of you, but I want to be clear that everybody's on the same page. So I'll just make everything clear. So what we're doing with Convpaint is so-called semantic segmentation based on sparse labels. So what does that mean? Let's begin with sparse labels. So what sparse labels means is that we can just scribble basically onto the image like I did before, right? We scribble some examples of what shall be one class and then some examples what shall be the other class. And we can do this with as many classes as we want. And those are just examples. And from these examples, we want to get the bottom right part here, the segmentation. And what's important with semantic segmentation is to distinguish it or like to differentiate it from instance segmentation. So semantic segmentation is about differentiating parts of the image that represent different types of objects or texture or whatever, not separate instances. So that's important to realize, and Convpaint is aiming at doing semantic segmentation. Maybe a quick information about how Convpaint actually does it, and that's also important to just know a little bit better than also how to use it. We're doing semantic segmentation. There would technically be many or like more than one possibility to do this. For example, you could divide the image in separate parts or something like this. What we do with Convpaint is we classify each pixel. So maybe this becomes more clear. Let's go 2 steps further. Maybe this becomes clearer here. So we are analyzing the image by extracting some features for each separate pixel at each position. And then we can also, we can concatenate multiple features, and we use then the annotations together with those features. We feed those into a classifier, and this classifier then can learn like which features should be represented with which class. And when we train this classifier, obviously then we can apply the trained classifier on all the pixels in this image or also in a new image. So we can use it on, obviously then later also on different images. We can use it to segment the entire image and to assign a class to every single pixel of this image or of another image, of 100 images, 1,000, or as many as we want. And what's special about Convpaint is basically this part here. Can you even see it? Like it's this part here. Because we are using like a modular, basically architecture where we can use or where we are prepared to use multiple different ways to extract features. Notably, we use AI models. So we use pre-trained AI models like convolutional neural networks, vision transformers, and we can also still in the future add new such feature extractors. So you could also, if you know a little bit about coding, we implemented Convpaint in a way that users can even implement their own feature extractors if they want. Yes, so I just saw that there was this question about comparison to pixel classification from Elastic. So this is a very valid question because there's definitely, very obviously, there's there's similarities. And so basically this architecture that you can see right now, this is very similar. So Elastic also uses feature extraction and feeds them into a classifier, like a random forest. By the way, by now we're using a little bit more advanced classifier, not the random forest anymore, but this is a technical detail. But what's really different between Convpaint and Elastic is, first of all, this part here. So we allow and we inherently use AI models, so pre-trained AI models, as opposed to Elastic, which uses human-crafted filters. So with Elastic, this is very like fixed. Of course, you can still choose between combinations of filters and such, but not the very advanced and like state-of-the-art AI models. And I'm going to show you some examples later in the workshops where this makes a difference. And as a matter of fact, actually, we have even implemented, so like as kind of like a custom model or as a substitution for CNNs, ViTs, we have implemented the Elastic filter bank as well. So basically in Convpaint, you can kind of mimic Elastic as well. And yeah, with that, I'm gonna go the slides back again. And, oh, can I? Yeah. And a little bit tell you what makes Convpaint, at least obviously from my point of view, what makes Convpaint special and what's unique about it. So as you'll hopefully see, Convpaint is very flexible in its usability. So you can use it on a lot of different data. We have implemented a lot of options and features, like features of the tool. Then it's widely applicable because also you can change the ways of extracting features. You can apply it to totally different domains of images as well. And because it's written in a Python framework, it's highly interoperable. So I'm mostly going to talk about the Napari plugin today, but I hope it's also, or we also have an API, so you can really use it then in like, or reuse it also with other tools that are working with Python, or also in Napari, obviously. Yeah, so these are the, I think, three really unique strengths of Convpaint. And one thing that's not necessarily unique for Convpaint, this you probably also know from Elastic, if you know Elastic, is that the segmentation is steerable. So depending on what you annotate, you can extract different classes. So in this example here, we have a cell, and we have some clusters here, and we also have fibers. And depending on what you annotate, you get a different segmentation, right? So if you annotate the clusters as one class, and then everything else, including all fibers and background, as another class, you will also get a segmentation that shows exactly this, like here. And on the other hand, if you annotate the fibers versus background, you will also get fibers. So this I've already shown you. By the way, one thing I want to mention in this context here is many people ask, like, why not train a new CNN or vision transformer from scratch? And the reason is pretty simple, because it's so much faster and easier and more flexible to use a pre-trained, like a very good and flexible and strong pre-trained AI model, maybe trained by a huge company that has means that we don't even have, and then adjust it by this architecture here to do, like, to solve your specific task. And as I showed you, you can then just use it for different annotations. So if in the example before here, you would need to train different CNNs or different whole models from scratch for these two tasks. And we can use the same model and give it new annotations and kind of repurpose it for different segmentation tasks. So now let's get a bit more practical. And first, before we do the workshop parts, I just want to, as I said before, say something a little bit about annotations. And so the annotations I did before in the demonstration were consciously chosen not to be perfect, but I want to show you now that obviously it's important that the way you annotate obviously impacts the way your segmentation is going to look like. Wait, I'll just check the question. Yes, I'll actually get to that just in the next slide, Daniel. Thanks for the question. So first, let's focus on the annotations. So I think it's pretty clear from how the whole tool works that it can only know how to classify the pixels for which you give it some examples in the annotations. So it's important that basically your annotations reflects what is inside the class. And what we suppose, or like what we propose, what we suggest is basically making sure that your annotations meet those three criteria. By the way, this is also in the documentations. There is a page about this. One criteria is that if there's objects that you take an annotation that goes along the center ridge. So maybe you have, like, let's say, for example, in a snake, you go along the body. So you basically catch all the information that might vary in the longitudinal axis, right? So you catch the snake's tail, but you also catch the snake's head. Then the second aspect that you should, or like the second criteria that you should meet, is the opposite way, right? So you also want to take some annotations perpendicular to the center edge, because then you catch all the variability in the other dimension. And last but not least, we really recommend that you annotate the borders, or like around the boundaries, across the boundaries actually, and as close as possible, basically, because this tells the model also as exactly as possible, like what should be class 1 and what should be the other class. And obviously, as I said, ideally you combine all three of these. Usually, if you just quickly want to try out the model or something, you don't spend too much time with the annotations. But as soon as you actually really want to train a model that's really that you want to apply to a lot of data and that you want to create reliable segmentations, it's probably also worth spending a little bit more time and doing really well, like a good annotation. So now we're getting to your question, Daniel. So first of all, I'd like to also refer to the documentations. So maybe I can even open it up just quickly. I don't want to go too much into details because we put a lot of information in the documentations that we cannot cover all right now, but just so you've seen it once. So we have basically this page here. So you have all the feature extractors described here. And as you can see, we have this general guideline because there's basically two major kind of aspects of the image that could be that are most important to a task. Usually you're either interested in local features or more contextual features. And here is the easy recommendation. If you're more interested in local features, you can use VGG16 or actually Elastic, for example. And if you want to use more, or if you want to solve a task that needs more contextual information, so maybe more the question like, what is this the part of, or where is it, like how is it arranged, then you might need more, for example, vision transformer models. And the one we actually recommend is called Dino Jafar. So this is the Dino V2 model of Meta AI. We know there's recently been released Dino V3. We're probably going to implement it as well, but this hasn't. We haven't had time for that yet. So this is still based on Dino V2, which is still already a really great model for especially natural images, but also, for example, for histology slides and stuff like these. And what the Jafar stands for is check up any feature at any resolution. So that's the whole name. What it basically means is like it's a rescaler that helps you increase the resolution, because Dino V2 being a vision transformer, it works with patches, and then it can give you a patchy segmentation. So basically the resolution of Dino, like default Dino without the Jafar part, is basically 14 by 14 because of this patch size, and the Jafar helps you really increase and amplify your resolution. So these are basically the two easy choices. If you want to go dig a bit deeper, feel free to go and check out in the documentations. As you see, we've made huge quantifications with different feature extractors on 3 different data sets, and there's a lot of information that you can get out of this page as well. Yeah, so this is also what I basically said in the with the documentations. This is just a summary basically. So local features like edges, colors, textures, if this is the main property of your image or the main property that you need to use for solving your segmentation tasks, then we recommend just use the default feature extractor that we have in Convpaint, which is a CNN called VGG16, or you can actually switch to Elastic if you're interested, or try out both and take the one that works better. If you're interested, as I said, in contextual features like shapes, positions, and more the question, how is it arranged, use Dino Jafar. So with this, I'd like to open Convpaint again. And if you're ready for it, I would suggest that you try to follow along. If not, just pay attention and try to really follow what I'm doing just by watching. So for this workshop, or for this example, I'd like to open this sample image because this is available for everybody. It should be available for everybody, I hope. So it's one in open sample and then Napari built-ins, and then use this coins example. So as you can see, this is a grayscale image, and Convpaint automatically sees this, and it chooses single channel image as image type. Then, yeah, maybe let's actually already go a little bit through the interface. In the context of image type, we can also have different options for normalization. So because this is just a single channel and also only 2D, we can obviously only normalize by plane. So by this one plane, we'll see later when we do 3D segmentations that we can also normalize over stack. And obviously we can always turn off this normalization. So what we have here now is, first of all, we can choose the image layer that will like basically provide the pixel information. So the one that we actually want to segment. Here we only have one choice because we only have one image loaded. So this is already correct. And then sometimes you might want to try maybe different annotations, or you might want to load an annotation from an external source or whatever. Then you can choose the correct one here. Again, now there's only one to choose from, and this is correct for the moment. And then obviously now we need to add these annotations. Let me just quickly check if I forgot something. Yes, so that's good. And now already in this image, maybe you can see, or at least I can see with a little bit of experience, that it's important, for example, to annotate across this axis here as well, because we have more, like it's brighter here and it's darker here. So this would be one of those things that can be really good to get to know how to annotate with some experience. So now in the annotations, we can go, so now we have the label 1 selected. We can, for example, give some information about the background at different places with different brightness. And then, as I said, it's usually good to also have some more like in the other direction. So not only along the center ridge kind of, but also like this. Let's just give it plenty of information. And then maybe also along boundaries, maybe also down here. And now we also want to annotate the coins. Again, these, for this demonstration purpose, they don't need to be perfect. Let's just go quickly here. And then also, so if we press train and we have auto segment, it's gonna segment automatically. And then also what's really nice about this kind of tool, this is similar to Elastic, right? Is that once you've segmented it, you can still adjust it. So now maybe we're not super happy with what we see on the bottom left, right? So we can just go and say like, actually, so always make sure that you actually select the right layer. And then, so we can say this, we really want to be coins. And this up here, we really want to be, again, go to annotation, this, And let's actually maybe add here something as well. And let's just give it another try, because we can always go back and adjust it again. So this looks much better already. And now, actually, let's just add a little bit of background here. And then I would like to show you one more feature that I personally like a lot. And this is the thing here called smoothen segmentation. So in technical terms, this just applies a majority filter. What it does more intuitively is like it just, as it says, it smoothens. So it removes small details like these single pixels here, because it analyzes and it sees like these are just two single pixels within the other class, and then it can remove it. So as you can see, the result already looks pretty nice. So maybe what we could do still is just make sure that the border here, it doesn't want to grasp. But let's not be perfectionists here, but I think we can see that with pretty straightforward work, we can solve this admittedly pretty simple segmentation task. So what, just to finish explaining the home tab here, so the most basic features of Convpaint, let's just quickly draw the attention to this part here, like the top part in the home tab. So you can always see which model that you've selected. Because the model selection is in a different tab, you always get a glimpse of which model do you actually have currently selected. And then you can save the entire model. So like the Convpaint model, including all the information, all the settings that you've chosen here. And then you can obviously load it again as well. You can reset Convpaint. That can help sometimes if you're getting lost in applying some settings and stuff like these. And what we've implemented is that you have basically two options for saving. One is as a YAML file, which only contains the information about the model. So maybe you know, like if I'm using this feature extractor with this amount of segmentation smoothing and maybe some advanced settings or stuff like this, you just want to keep this information for maybe training it later in another context. So that would be what the YAML file is for. And then you can also save it as a pickle file, which includes also the classifier next to all the information. So let's actually now open another example where it's more about the models like to use for the feature extraction. So let's, for this, take the example camera. And now I would also like to start using more classes, because here it might be interesting not only to, I don't know, differentiate the human and everything else, but maybe we want to differentiate human, background, or like maybe human, sky, background, and camera. Let's do this. And because sometimes it can become a bit tedious, at least with multiple, like with many classes, to keep that in mind or to remember which is which, we've added this tab for the class labels. So we can define it before or after, obviously, but we can use it and we can remember it. So for example, we can say class 0, no, class 1, sorry, is background. Then let's say class 2 is human, class 3 could be sky, and class 4 is cam. And another thing that I would like to point out and also put your attention to is that I think if you actually, I just got the question, can you share how many class should we use, like the range? So this is really a specific question for about the task. So technically you can use any amount of classes that you want. So technically you could try to say buildings, trees, grass, and eyes, nose, lips. This is possible. So there's not, I don't think there's really like right or wrong. So basically this is really dependent on your problem that you want to solve with your segmentation. The only thing that's really important to keep in mind is what I said about the difference between semantic segmentations as segmentation and instance segmentation. So whereas you could technically also distinguish left eye and right eye, for example, this is still a semantic difference, right? But you should not confuse it with differentiating one instance from another. I hope that makes sense. But within like semantic segmentation, there's really nothing, like no right or wrong when it comes to the number of different classes. Does that make sense, Guillaume? Does that answer your question? I'll take it as a yes. Okay, so let's go on with our cameraman. And what I wanted to point your attention to, oh, okay. So you're still kind of confused about how many classes should we use, like the range. So yeah, what I can say about it is it depends on what your goal is to achieve. So for example, if you're a cell biologist and you have and you have microscopy images similar to the one that I showed you in the beginning, it really depends on what you want to observe. Do you want to get the area of the cells in two different conditions? Then you only need to segment cells versus background. So that would make two classes. So you should use two classes in this scenario. But if, for example, you have a very detailed image of cells where you can detect different parts of the cell, like the nucleus and maybe mitochondria and things like these. So maybe you have 10 different things that you wanna segment, and then obviously you should also use annotations for all those 10 things. I think we'll go on. Okay, thanks for the thumbs up. I'm happy this worked. And let's go on with this example. What I wanted to point out is that I find that when I'm using Convpaint, especially when I'm using multiple classes, and then also you'll see it in later on in 3D when we're using it on 3D data, is to actually use the keyboard shortcuts. So as you can see, you can use Shift and then together with A, S, D, or F to toggle annotations. So for example, let's just put some simple ones here. If I'm pressing Shift A, I can show them or hide them. And this can be really helpful. And then if you want to train, you can press Shift S. Like this is not going to create a good segmentation, but just for presenting the shortcuts. And now it also already segmented because we have auto segment turned on, right? But if you want to do this step by step, you can obviously, let's actually remove that again. So you could press Shift A Shift S, then it does the training, and then Shift D, and then it does the segmentation, and then you can, with Shift F, you can toggle the segmentation. And what's really, really good is also, or like helpful, I think, is also the right part here. So with Shift Q, Shift W, Shift E, or Shift R, you can switch between the first 4 classes. So I can, yes, Daniel, that's exactly right. That's exactly what I want to show you, that we're going to use the Jafar model in this case. Very good comment. And now, so if I press Shift Q, as you can see, it automatically selects the annotations layer, and it automatically selects the brush here and the label number 1. So I can do this, and then I can press Shift W, and right away it switches to 2, and then I can add an annotation here. I can press Shift E, and then I can annotate here. Then I can go back to Shift Q, and this makes the whole workflow much, much faster. Like now I'm not even sure if I actually chose the right ones. So let's maybe even remove it and add a new one. As you can see here, I haven't talked yet about this button here, because usually when you open, like when you select an image here, Convpaint automatically adds an annotation layer with the right shape. So you don't have to bother about or think about which exact shape it has to be. And you can do that manually in cases like here when you removed the annotation manually as well. So let's start over. I just wanted to point out that the shortcuts are really helpful, because now we can also, for example, leave this one open. We can always check the different classes and switch with the shortcuts between the annotations. So for example, I'm using background. Oh no, this is actually sky, sorry. By the way, in Napari, you can also undo with Control-Z. Maybe that's also a good shortcut to know as well. So background, that would mean basically everything that's not human, sky, or camera. So basically that includes the buildings. So let's make sure that it knows this. Let's also make sure that it knows we want the grass. And now remember the kind of things that we said, these are also always more or less along the center ridge, right? So maybe I also want to do from the other class, which in this case is the camera, like more perpendicular, also from the man. And then last but not least, we said that we really want to go along the boundaries, like the boundaries to the man, the boundaries to the sky, and then also the boundaries to the camera, right? Okay, so let's say we're happy with this background. Then we can press Shift W to switch to the human. Let's do similar things here. By the way, here in objects or classes that have different parts, like a human, for example, we have the head, we have the hands, the arms, the legs, and stuff like this. Obviously, it's super important to annotate all these different parts so the model actually knows they all belong in the same class. So let's make a huge annotation here along the kind of longitudinal axis, and then let's add a couple of those here. Let's make sure that it also catches information that the fingers belong to this class. And then let's make sure that we have some annotation along the boundaries, again, to all the other classes. So also to the camera, for example. So let's leave it with this. And then, as we've seen before, we can always see the results and then improve it later. So with the sky, let's add one here. And then just make sure that we're catching boundaries and all the details. Also the boundaries to the camera and the boundaries also to the man, right? And then last but not least, I can press Shift and R and right away go to the camera. Let's actually do the boundaries first here. And then the centerage. Let's also show it that this belongs to the camera. I just saw that there was a question about training on multiple images. I'll get to that in a second. Okay, and now let's say these are our annotations. And let's see what happens if we use the same kind of model that we used for the coins before. So let's turn this on actually again, because usually we always want to train and then segment right away because we want to see the result, right? Let's see in this case. And show the segmentation. So this doesn't look very bad on the first view, but actually if you look where it thinks there's camera, it doesn't really make sense. It's just because we've added quite a lot of annotations that it looks kind of okay. But let's now follow the suggestion of Daniel, actually, because you concluded correctly that the Jafar model would be better here. So let's try this. So as you see, we have many models to choose from. By the way, this is in the model options tab. So this whole tab is about choosing the feature extractor. So here you have the feature extractor, and actually down here you can also change some of the settings for the classifier. However, this is usually not necessary. So really the main part in this tab is here where you can choose the feature extractor. So for CNNs, you can also choose different layers to take. So you can tell the CNN at which layer it shall stop extracting the features, but we're not going to go too much into detail here. Let's just stick with choosing the right model. And in this case, as we've discussed, let's choose the Dino Jafar small, and then you log it in with set feature extractor. And then you can see it's reflected here in Dino Jafar small. And let's give it a try. So depending on the model and obviously also the image size, training and segmentation can take a while. This is really dependent on those two things mostly. We have actually, let's use the time that it needs to train and segment for discussing this. We've implemented multiple ways to speed up the process. So as you can see, by the way, now I think the segmentation looks pretty good for what we wanted to see, right? So we have the background, including the buildings, the grass is red. We have the sky is purple with a little bit of like lacking preciseness, but also it's actually true we did not annotate up to the upper border, so we could still do this. We can actually do it right now. So let's maybe add, so this is number 3 is sky. By the way, if you're confused why, like if the labels jump, this is because I'm using the shortcuts. So now I'm pressing Shift E which will select label number 3. And then I can just add this. Maybe even here, we want to go a bit closer to the building. And that's it. Maybe we can also add some more background. So that would be class 1. So I'm pressing Shift Q. And let's see what happens. And here I can pick up what I was talking about before. So we've implemented multiple ways to speed up the models. So on one hand, you have the option to kind of simply downsample the input and then upsample the segmentation again to the original size. This is really the most straightforward and the easiest thing to do. Obviously, you're losing the resolution by this factor. But let's actually see what happens if we're doing downsample input 2. You're going to see it's going to be much faster, but we're going to lose some of the resolution. But in certain cases, this can actually be, it's very possible that this is totally fine. So in this case, for example, I wouldn't say that it looks worse, but it was much faster. So I would also really recommend, if you're planning to use Convpaint, really try to also play a little bit around and try those settings here. That's also why we put those actually really in the home tab, in the main tab, because depending on what resolution your image has, you really don't need the original resolution because it's only going to use up your computation, basically. The other thing that we've implemented to speed up the process is so-called tiling. So you can tile at 2 different places. Basically, you can tile annotations while training. So what this does is basically it only takes a surrounding around each annotation and then only extracts the features from this tile or from these tiles, because it's going to be multiple ones. Obviously, if you annotate as much as we did on this image here, this is not going to be super helpful. Like, this is not going to make a big difference. But if, for example, you only annotate a little part of an image, so like if for example, we open again the coins, here it's totally valid. It would be totally valid to only annotate like this and then this. Maybe that will already work. And then if you use tile annotations for training, it's only gonna so like it's only gonna use this part here and this part here of the image and this part here and this part here for extracting the features, because those are the only ones where we have information to train the classifier anyways. So for example, all this part of the image, like extracting the features for all these parts, this is not necessary for the training, right? Because we're not going to use it to train the classifier anyways. And the other part, or like the other place where we can use the tiling, is then also for segmentation. Obviously, for segmentation, we always need to have the features for all the pixels because we want to segment all the image. But what we can do here is we can divide the image in multiple tiles, and then it can be, or it's usually much faster to do this, like to process the smaller parts, and also we can process in parallel. Having said this, it's also important to know your feature extractors. So these two, they work really well, for example, on CNNs for like convolutional neural networks, because they always capture the information for a pixel. They capture it in the surrounding of the pixel. Whereas, for example, with the Dino V2, and then obviously also with the Jafar, because this uses Dino as a base model, it's different because vision transformers, as I said, they divide the image into small patches, and then they compare the patches in all the image. And that's also what actually makes them really strong. And if you would tile the image for Jafar, you lose the strength of the feature extractor. So that's also why if you choose Dino Jafar or Dino, this is going to be by default turned off. Whereas if, for example, you would now go and choose a CNN, or for example, also Elastic, at least the tile annotations part will be turned on by default. I hope that makes sense. And now maybe I can address your question, Daniel, about the training on multiple images. So it's inherently possible to do this in Convpaint. It's super straightforward in the API. And it's going to be one of the next things that we're going to add again in the plugin. So at this very moment, you don't see the option here to train Convpaint on multiple images right away. So, but we've had this option before, but we've removed it for now because we want to re-implement it in a much nicer way. So right now, at this very moment, it's not kind of online, but it should be pretty soon back in the plugin. And also, as I said, if you're familiar a little bit with coding, I highly suggest also to check out the API, because there it's really straightforward. So you can just take lists of images, lists of annotations, pass it to the model, and then it's going to be trained on all those images. But again, also in the plugin, it should be available pretty soon. And there is actually also a way that we've already implemented that you kind of can train on multiple images, because I wanted to talk about this later actually, but it fits pretty well here, so I'm just going to explain it now, is this feature called continuous training here, or like the setting continuous training, because we're saving the features that we've extracted. You can keep them saved within the model, and by default, this is only done as long as you're working on the same image. What this does, it can make it much faster, obviously. So similar to the tiling of the annotations, it can, or especially also in combination with the tiling of the annotations, it can speed up the process enormously. So for example, again, here it's not good because we're using the vision transformer. But if you're using a CNN, and for example, you go here to the annotations and you add this little bit of annotation, usually or originally without the continuous training, it would extract all the features for all these annotations again. So basically the entire image. But we are saving the features for all the annotated pixels in the model, and then only add the ones like the features for the newly annotated pixels. And as I said, usually we're only doing this as long as you're working on the same image, but you can also turn this to global and then basically train on multiple images, but kind of in sequence. So you just keep the model, so you keep the training status kind of from the earlier image, and then you can keep it while you annotate and train and add the new information from a second image and then also from a third image. Having said this, it's also possible to totally turn off this setting. That can be helpful in cases where you want to be really clear what you're doing, like that it always extracts all the features new. It can be helpful. And also, by the way, you can always check the distribution of the classes that are in your model, like saved in the continuous training model. And then obviously you can reset these features again and start from scratch. Okay, so this was the second example that I wanted to show you. And let's go back to the presentation. I just very briefly want to mention a little bit about different types of imaging data. So until now, we've only worked with the coins example, which was grayscale, and also with the human, like with the camera example, which was a different type of image from the content, but it was still just a grayscale image, and both of them also just 2D. So in technical terms, those were both 2D arrays. And we've implemented Convpaint in a way that it can straightforwardly process also 3D data. So that means time series. So where you have for each time point, you have what we had before. So you have at time 1, you can have a grayscale image, at time 2, 3, 4, and so on, as you can see here in this slide. And in this very same way, you can handle 3D images, which is technically more or less the same thing because it's just a 3D array. Just in the time series, the third dimension is time. And in 3D images, the third dimension is just an additional spatial dimension next to the 2 original ones. And one thing that I think is really important for you to also understand if you're working with Convpaint and basically in segmentation in general, or actually image analysis in general, is the difference, or also like what it actually means when an image has multiple channels. So this is really important to differentiate between like a normal 3D image and a multi-channel image. So for the 3D image, it's basically, this could also be 3D as in time series, but you're having a separate, so you're extracting features for each separate plane. So you can say like each plane is like a separate image. So this is like an image, and then just stacked onto this, you have another one, and so on. But that also makes it clear that obviously you also want, in the end, as a result, you also want a 3D segmentation, right? Because you want to say at this depth, this pixel is maybe class 1. Here it's maybe class 2, and here it's maybe class 1 again, or something like this. So this is really different parts of the image, just in a third dimension. Whereas if you're dealing with a multi-channel image, the channels are also technically seen a third dimension, but they are representing the same place. They're representing the same pixel. So you can imagine, like, here you want to see through those multiple channels and also combine the information of those channels within, like, or for one segmentation. And you also want to use those information to create one resulting class. So in a simple way, or in a simple example, this can be RGB, right? So you have a channel for red, a channel for green, and a channel for blue. And obviously you want to use all those three informations to define what something is. And then obviously you can combine them. We also support that you can have a third dimension like spatial or time dimension, and also additionally multiple channels. So that would mean in the end, as a result, you have 4D data. And this is also supported by Convpaint. So let's see that in action. I'll just quickly check if there's some questions. This is actually a very good question. And I would say that that I'm lacking a little bit of experience in really working on a lot of 3D data. So I couldn't say that like my sample size is large enough to give like a well-based recommendation, but I think it would make sense to treat the third dimension as you would the other ones, right? So you really want to just make sure that in all the, like also in this dimension, you're actually covering all the variability within the image. I hope that makes sense. And also what I want to mention is that we're also working on implementing to actually use the third dimension in the feature extraction as well. Because as I explained here, right now we're treating them as stacks of 2D arrays, but obviously you could always turn around the dimensions. If it's a proper 3D imaging data, you could also treat different two dimensions as the planes, kind of. Does that make sense? And we're about to implement this as well. But at the moment, it's only just like processed as a stack of 2D data. Let's actually jump into some examples. I hope it becomes clearer then. So let's close what we had so far. So for this, let's start with a more or less simple 3D image. Maybe if it was too fast, it's the Bern 3D image here. And what you might have observed is that automatically again, Convpaint created an annotations layer for you. And what you can see here, what's different now is you can actually choose between single channel and multi-channel image. So this is very important, that if you're loading higher dimensional data, that you're consciously deciding the right image type. Because if we tell Convpaint now it's a multi-channel image, it's going to do what I showed you before in the slide. It's going to try to capture all the information for one pixel across the third dimension. And that's really not what we want here. If we expect the image, this is really just a 3D image where the third dimension covers or like represents the third, like a spatial dimension, right? So we want to treat this third dimension as kind of independent, or like a stack of 2D planes. So, and by the way, one way you can also realize if you've by accident chosen multi-channel image is if your annotation is not going to be different for each plane. So if we add some annotation here, you will see if we switch through the third dimension, the annotation stays there. This is the behavior that you would expect from multi-channel images, but not from like a 3D spatial or time series data. So this would be a hint that you've chosen the wrong image type. So let's switch to single channel, and you'll see it created a new annotations layer. And also maybe that is the perfect time to mention this as well. This adding of fresh annotation layers, in certain cases, it might be annoying you. Like maybe you're saying, I don't want you to add those annotations layers automatically. You can turn this off here in the advanced tab. You can go to layers handling, and you could, for example, just remove that tick here. I've also added an option to just rename the old layers and keep them. So maybe that's the behavior that you would like to have. And I'll just let you try this out on your own if you feel like that could be useful. But I wanted to point out that you have multiple additional options for handling the layers here. So now let's double check single channel image. Yes. So as you also see, we now have the additional option normalize over stack. And here, again, I think it's important to point out that also, or like that here, there's no right or wrong. That's also why you even have those two options, right? It really depends on your images and on your kind of how you understand your image to be. Like, should each stack be treated and normalized by itself? So should they be kind of comparable, or should it be treated more as an overall package of images? And let's now just leave it with normalized by plane. And by the way, sometimes it also just makes sense to empirically try out both options and choose the one that more reflects what you would expect from the results. So let's keep normalized by plane for now. And let's do a simpler segmentation again. So maybe we can have background and then bone, and then I don't even know how to call that. Let's maybe call it tissue. It's probably not the correct expression, but I think that's not the point right now. So let's add some annotations for the background. Let's go close to the boundary. Let's also tell the model that these things here, they belong to the background and not to the brain or to the head. Now let's take the bone. So I pressed Shift W again. Like here, we don't have much differentiation in the annotation. Like this is along the center ridge and along the boundary at the same time. And I think that should be enough. Let's take the tissue, and here we're just gonna make sure that it also knows that this outer part here, this is all also tissue. And now let's actually double check. So maybe for this, Jafar is not needed, right? Maybe this is not a contextual information that we need, but it's more about the pixel values, edges, texture, and stuff like this. So let's actually choose, for this case, elastic, just so we've tried a third option for the feature extraction. Elastic, set feature extractor. It's always important to really make sure that you press this button. So you really switch the feature extractor, and then you can also double check up here that you've actually changed it. And now let's, to begin with, start with without any downsampling, without any smoothing of the segmentation. We can still adjust this later. And let's just see what happens. So this looks pretty fine, I would say. If we want to, and now, by the way, I'm just gonna show you again how useful the shortcuts can be. So with Shift F, you can toggle the segmentation on and off. Because if you show the segmentation, maybe you don't remember or you can't really see, is there really bone? Do I want this to be classified as bone or not? So it can be handy to toggle it on off. And now we would see, oh no, there's a misclassification here. So you can turn it off. We know we want it to be tissue, so you can press Shift E. Now we want to see again, where was the misclassification? So we press Shift F. So here it is, Shift E, and we can add it. Let's show the segmentation again, and let's try what happens. And it works. So usually, as I said, I'm quite a fan of the setting smoothen segmentation. Let's try this and see what happens. So it does make it just a little bit smoother. It removed some single pixels here. And I think this is really nice. So also the shortcut Shift A we can use to remove the annotations. And now we can really see, if we toggle the segmentation on and off, we can really inspect our results. And I think this is going really well. And what I want to point out now is, again, so until now, we've basically done the exact same thing that we did before, right? Because we were only segmenting one plane. But if you go along the third axis, you see, okay, we've only treated one plane. So what's really cool is, like, now it was not, or for this plane, it was not obviously necessary to add other annotations. But let's see if we can actually use the trained classifier to also segment another plane. Let's, for example, take this one. So now we don't have to train it again. The classifier is already trained, and we can press segment image or press Shift and D, which is especially in 3D really handy to segment this plane. So now we can go through the image and press Shift D where we want to segment. And then maybe at some places, for example, here, we see, oh no, this is probably not what we wanted. We wanted this to be, let's double check, tissue. So class 3. I've pressed Shift E now to label this as class 3. And now we can, again, train, and it's going to add the information of those pixels. And then because we have auto segment, it's also going to segment them. And if we hide the annotations, we see, yes, now it worked. And like this, you can optimize your segmentation. So this is still wrong because we have not produced a new prediction for this plane here, right? We've only produced a new one here where we also added the annotation. But another thing that we can do is we can say, okay, now let's use this classifier and apply it to the whole stack. So now we've applied it to all the planes of the stack. And as you can do with Napari in general, you can also visualize it in 3D. So you can really see the 3D dimension here. And this is more like a Napari feature. What can be really nice is if you, for example, have multiple classes, you can select this one, show selected only, because then you don't have all the classes at once. So for example, maybe we only want to see where is the bone. And then let's actually hide the annotations and maybe even hide the original image. So you can see where do I have the bone in the segmentation. Another little tip for Napari in general, a shortcut that I like to use a lot also, this is not specific for Convpaint, so that's also why it's not listed here, but it's really good to know, is Control R, which is just resetting the view. So especially in 3D, if you're turning it and at different angles, if you press Control R, you're going to be back in the original view. And another thing that's actually good to know is if you press space, you're always, let's go to the annotations layer, you're always in the drag and move image mode. Even if you're actually in the brush mode. So now now I could add something, but it doesn't show because it's behind the segmentation layer. But, or no, that's actually not the reason. Why didn't it add anything? Okay, let's ignore that just for a moment. But when you're in the brush mode and you press space, you can still drag the image. So this is not only in 3D, but for example here, if you're in the brush mode, there's something weird. It's because, yeah, because, yeah, there was some bug in Napari actually, because it just didn't show the other classes. So now we're back. So now we can add annotations, and if you press space, you can move the image. Especially good if you're zoomed in, and for example, you want to add background and maybe the other class here. So I hope that was not too confusing. I just wanted to point out two additional keyboard shortcuts for Napari, which is Control R to remove, like to return to the original view, and that you can use space wherever you are or in which mode you are to drag the image. That's all. Okay, so let's now go on to the next and last, the final example image that I want to work on with you today, especially to show you how we can deal or how Convpaint handles multi-channel images. And for this, we're going to open the sample image kidney 3D 3 channels. So this already tells you what to expect from the image. And now the first thing that I'm showing you is, this is not specific for Convpaint. This is just a thing in Napari, and basically it's just inherent to displaying multiple layers and like that stand for multiple channels, is the way these channels are opened at the moment is in separate layers, right? So you have one layer for the actin channel, one layer for WGA, and one for nuclei. And Napari, because it knew from the sample image, it knew which one to give which color. So we have inherently in the layer, we said display actin as red, display WGA as green, and nuclei as blue. This is also why it's nicely displayed in those three different colors. So if, for example, I chose nuclei also to be green, we cannot really differentiate those anymore. And I'm pointing this out because because if we want to treat these three channels in Convpaint as like a multi-channel image, we need to combine them into one single image, because this is what we want to process, right? We want to process it as an image with multiple channels. But and you'll see in a second why, first duplicate those layers. Because as I showed you, as long as we have them in separate layers in Napari, we can say which color should it be shown in. And if we, as you'll see right now, if we merge the layers to a stack, we don't have this information. So if we just for now turn off the separate channels, so this is now the stack. Let's actually call it like that, kidney stack. And now we only have one color map available, because technically it doesn't even know which one is the channels axis and which one is the spatial axis. This is not inherently saved in the image, right? So it can't really differentiate optically between the different channels. And that's also fine, because we are inside Convpaint, we are telling it, we have both. We have one axis in 3D and one axis is the channels. So Convpaint can handle it, but Napari doesn't know how to display it properly in different colors. That's why it just shows everything in blue, but you can slide across the different channels. But I think you probably agree with me that this is much harder to actually look at and know what you're looking at than the thing that we had before. So if we have separate channels with different colors that are overlaid over each other, this is much easier to actually know what you're looking at, right? And so it's also much easier to make annotations with channels like these. And why I'm saying this is simply this is just a simple trick for handling layers in Napari. This you can also use outside of Convpaint. And what we will do now for segmenting this is we'll use the three separate layers as a displaying aid, kind of. So we'll just display these in the different colors and as an overlay, but we're actually choosing the kidney stack for Convpaint. So this we can even hide, because we don't need it to be visualized, but we need to choose it from the image layer in Convpaint. Also now it has added the appropriate annotations layer. So this should have the right shape now. And now we can go and annotate. And as you can see here, Convpaint realized that it's 4 dimensions. And as I said before, in Convpaint, 4D images are always interpreted as 3 spatial, or like 2 spatial and a time dimension, but basically a 3D image plus a channels dimension. So this must be, because it's a 4D data, it must be multi-channel image, and this is inferred by the model. Like this it sees a 4D array and it knows it must be a multi-channel image plus a third dimension, basically. And now we can do the whole annotation thing again. Let's, for example, take background. Let's also make sure that we treat the holes in here as background. And again, this would depend now a lot on what you actually want to do with your data, right? What you actually want to measure or observe. This is more like a toy example for us, but it's just to show you how we can deal with 4-dimensional data. So this would be the background. Now let's maybe add these knots. Like, I'm not a kidney expert, so bear with me if I'm using strange nomenclature, but I'll just call those knots. So it's these structures here where we have basically all the information or all the signals clamped together. So I would say this is the same structure. This maybe as well. And then let's maybe define those kind of red, blue, or like the red kind of tubes or circles as a third class. And we can actually go here and call that, as I said, so these are maybe let's call those circles. And then maybe the fourth class would be the green tubes. So and the mostly green kind of tubes. And let's just see what happens. And we can always, as we've discussed multiple times now, we can always iteratively improve our model. So one thing to think about is Elastic maybe the right model for this? It could be, but let's for now maybe switch back to the VGG16. We'll just use the default settings here and see how this will work. So let's train and segment and just see the result. So I think this is not perfect yet. Definitely not. There's some misclassifications, I would say. And let's just add some information where we have the misclassifications. So did I? Yeah, so let me see. I'm a bit confused right now. Give me a second, please. Yeah, I think the problem is that somehow I used, or like I annotated this as circles as well, the green ones. So that was by mistake. Let's actually show it like this. Yeah, so I just by accident chose the wrong class for the annotation of the green tubes. So we'll actually just go and remove these annotations. Where I think, no, down here. Sorry about that. So I hope now we'll be fine. So by the way, you can also press here to switch between the annotations. Okay, let's see and hope that now it's better. Yes, I think it's already much better. So what we have now is a little bit of misinterpretation of these knots. Let's maybe just play around a little bit. Let's try and see what Jafar would do with this. Again, because Jafar is a vision transformer, it's a bit more computationally expensive, so it's going to take a little bit longer. Actually, could have been a good idea to start with some downsampling, and then we can still reduce it if we feel like we need a better resolution. But and this is something else that we're definitely planning to implement very soon, is some more interactivity, like while it's computing. So a bit more information about where exactly in training it is, and giving the option to abort. We see that this would be really helpful as well. But what's really important now, I mean, we don't need to aim for a perfect segmentation at this moment, I would say. But what's really important is that it combines the information of all the channels, right? Because only in one channel we had the information that is displayed by green, and only in another channel we had the information about, or like that is displayed in red. So only when it knows and can combine those information, it actually can solve this segmentation task. So this is way too fine-grained, I would say. So it's trying to really differentiate single pixels, right? And this is exactly a case where it could be beneficial to actually downsample the input and also smoothen the segmentation. Let's just try this, and it should also be much quicker, especially if we downsample by a factor of 3. Let's just give it a try. There you go. So it looks much smoother, but it's still not perfect. So now we would have to really choose the best model. So this is really an empirical process as well. But we believe this exactly shows why Convpaint is, or like what this is exactly why we chose to create Convpaint in such a modular way because we believe there is not one model that works for everything. So it's really helpful if you can choose between different models and use their strength in one single framework and get used to the usability of Convpaint and then apply it to different really state-of-the-art models that really suit your task and your goal, right? So Daniel posted that he would argue that Jafar should perform better also in this case since it's more context dependent. I would actually agree. I think there's definitely a case for this, and probably if we did some more annotation, I think you could probably get the best results maybe really with Jafar. But if we look at the results, it's mainly so it's taking some green or like yeah, it's misclassifying some of the green as the knots and some of the red, especially in like the gaps, it's misclassifying as green. So I think we could probably pretty easily handle that with some more annotations. But as I said, I think I'm not going to aim here for the perfect segmentation. I just wanted to show you how different models can give different results. And I'd rather show you a little example now, and probably you don't have the system set up to follow along with this. So maybe just, just observe what I'm doing, because so this is basically those are the major things that I wanted to show you about about Convpaint. There's actually one thing that I wanted to show you as well, and then I'll switch to the next part. One thing that I wanted to show you is that per default, you're getting the segmentation. So this is just the most probable class for each pixel, right? But what you can also get is probabilities, and you can also get both at the same time. So this was actually not necessary. So if you extract probabilities instead of a segmentation, you get for each class, you get the probability map. So it's going to be high where the model predicted a high probability for this class. And then like this, you can get even more information how the model classified things. So this could, for example, might be interesting or helpful if you only want to classify certain things, if the model is really sure that it's this kind of object. So maybe you only want to classify something as, I don't know, for example, cancer or something, if the model is over 70% sure and not only if it's the most probable class across all classes, right? So this is just another little thing that you can do with Convpaint. And now I quickly want to show just one use case of how you can extract or how you can actually use really like in a very simple and straightforward pipeline, a mini pipeline, but how you can extract actual valuable information. So now we've only like we've just created those segmentations, and you might or might not ask or wonder or know already what you could do with this. And I just want to give you one example. So I'll just close Napari for a second. So I've got a question from Yarif. What is the feature extraction method? Boosting, which, sorry, I think I don't really understand what you're asking. So the feature extraction is always done with a pre-trained AI model. So those models, they're not trained. So the parameters of those models, they don't change. But we're just passing the image through this model. Like in the case of a CNN, it's only going to a certain depth of the CNN, and the image is going to be processed and analyzed by these models, and they produce so-called features. So you can imagine those are just more advanced information about the about the image at this particular place. So this is basically just an advanced information of what does this pixel represent. And this depends then obviously, like the nature of this information depends entirely on the model that you use for feature extraction. So for example, like I can't go too much into technical details, but a CNN, like a convolutional neural network, it analyzes with like a learned filter. It basically applies a learned filter onto the pixels and then iteratively applies filters again or kernels again. That's why it's called convolutional neural network, because it convolves those areas again and again. So this is just like an iterative filtering kind of, which can give you much richer representation of a pixel than only applying a single filter, like for example in a handmade filter bank. And we believe that the best is not even to have a fixed one, but actually to be able to choose the one that suits your task the best. And this is what we did with Convpaint. I hope that explained more or less what you were asking. Like, I don't know what you exactly referred to with boosting. Okay, nice. So let's have a quick look then, as I mentioned, at a simple post-processing pipeline. So for this, if you want to reproduce this, you would need the skimage package, also matplotlib, pandas. So these are very, in case you've worked with image analysis in Python, you definitely know those. Those are very, very basic packages for data science in general and for image analysis in specific for the skimage. So what I want to show you with this is that with really just a couple of lines of code, it's really no magic. You can already do like extract very valuable information from those segmentations that we're doing with Convpaint. So one thing is to note is that you can open a Napari viewer from Python. So from a notebook, we can define the like an instance of a Napari viewer like this. Opening Napari always takes a couple of seconds, so this is normal. Now we just need to, yeah. And now we can go here and open Convpaint. So now this Napari viewer is linked to the code that we have here, and we can access things that we're doing, like especially notably the layers that we're working with in the viewer, we can access now from the code. So what we're doing now is we're going to load an image, open Convpaint, I've already opened it now, annotate just some simple segmentation, and then run training and segmentation. And as I said, what we're doing with Convpaint is semantic segmentation. So we're only, in this case, we're actually going to use the coin example again. So in this case, we're only defining with Convpaint what is background and what are coins. So let's do this again. We've already done this before, so let's do this quick. We knew that it's important to annotate close to the coins. This border was important. And then I think this was also important. And now, oh, that was too far. Let's just see what happens. Yeah, so we need to add some more here. That was the wrong one. And then I'm also pretty sure that some smoothing will help. And let's see. There we go. Almost perfect, I would argue. And now the next step that we're going to do, because you might not be just interested in what's coins and what's background, but you might be interested in separate single coins. So for example, if this were cells, you might want to know how large are those cells. So there's a very very simple to use tool also as a plugin in Napari, which is called, I'll show you in the plugin, Napari segment blobs and things with membranes. So this is by Robert Hase. He has done a lot of helpful Napari plugins. This is also mentioned in our docs, by the way. So if you go on the Convpaint documentations, you'll see even more elaborated pipelines than this. So you can look it up there if you're interested. And we're just going to use this tool here, connected component labeling, to actually create instance. So such that we don't only have data about foreground, like coins and background. So now we also have to choose the right source. Maybe we'll exclude on edges, then we'll get rid of the thing up there. And if we run, we're going to get a mask with instances. And this is based on the semantic segmentation that we did with Convpaint, right? So this was only possible because we've already had this really nice segmentation with Convpaint. And now just quickly, let's rename this instances. So again, as I said, within Python, we now have access to the layer by the variable v, to the viewer by the variable v. And for example, we can extract the data in the layer called instances like this. So we can take the data from Napari into Python, into the notebook, and then it's going to be some special type, stack view, static view. So this is some Napari data type. So we have to convert it to a NumPy array, which is the very, very common, popular package, right? The very popular way to handle arrays in Python, or to treat also images in general. And then we can see like how large is it and what are the separate classes in this instance layer. So we have the classes from 0 to 24. 0, I have to double check myself actually if 0 is, yeah, 0 is background, and then we have the different classes for each coin. And now you have some very easy functions from these packages. So if you have the SK image measure region props table, you can really just pass this data and say which properties you want to extract. So let's say we're going to stay very simple and just extract the label. So the label means which class and the area. And we can put this into a pandas data frame, which again is like the Excel of Python, and it's going to look like this. So now we have for each label, like it's going to be longer. This is just the top 5 rows. For each label, we have the area. And now we can divide, for example, we can say, let's take the first 12 and then the lower 12 and analyze the data, like analyze the area. So we plot the area of the upper ones versus the area of the lower ones as a box plot, and already we can have some really insightful information. And you can even, for example, create an image which consists only of the upper parts, and add it back to Nopari. Like, for the sake of time, I'm not going to explain too much, but just to show you, just to showcase what you can do. So now you can pass back only the lower part. And we could even divide the coins into the bigger ones and the smaller ones. So there's really straightforward coding that you can use to do these kind of things in pandas. So you see this, I'm not going to explain the exact code, but I just want to show you that with a couple of lines of codes, you can already really divide the data into the larger ones versus the smaller ones compared to images. So imagine, for example, you have one image with larger coins and one with smaller coins, or you don't know if there are larger, like if the cells are larger in one image than in the other. These are ways to analyze them in a very straightforward. So I think the 2 hours are going to an end. And I know this was probably a lot of information. And this is also why I want to first of all say like a really big thank you to you for your attention. And I hope that I could show you a little bit how Convpaint can be useful and what are the strengths of Convpaint. And I would be obviously really, really happy if you're ever going to use Convpaint. Having said this, I've mentioned it before. If you know a little bit how to code, I really recommend have a look also at the API. It's also very interoperable with the plugin. So you can save, for example, you can save a model in the plugin and you can open it with the API and the other way around. So have a look at this. It's described in the docs. And finally, but not least, I really want to point out that we're here to help if you're using Convpaint. And I'm also super happy about any feedback that could be positive, that can be critical, it can be ideas or whatever. Yeah, so thanks in advance if you're going to try out Convpaint, and thanks again for your attention. And I wish you a nice rest of the day and of the week. Bye.